Snail is casting an Ion Storm. It's probably a combo piece, but I don't think he has the win here. Maybe I won't counter it, because if I do, I won't be able to stop Elk from casting something on their turn. I'll just pass priority. Oh, Ion Storm goes infinite with Honor-Worn Shaku, his commander, his background, and a sack outlet. Damn, Snail wins. Oops, should have countered it. Threat assessment is a very important skill to learn in EDH. Quick pop quiz. When does threat assessment start? I'll give you a moment to go into the comments and write your answer. And while you scroll down there, if you could subscribe, that'd be great. If your answer has to do with when you first see a threat, then I'm afraid you're wrong. But before I tell you the answer, I need to thank this video's sponsor, Cool Stuff Inc. If you use my code TTM at checkout, you can get 5% off your order. And it supports the channel. Thanks to Cool Stuff Inc. for sponsoring the video. So when does threat assessment start? As soon as you have any information. And in Commander, this happens immediately, since you see everybody else's commander. And some of those might be threats by themselves, meaning you already know what an upcoming scary bomb will be. Figuring out what your opponent is doing is a really important piece of threat assessment, because every use of removal has a hidden cost, an opportunity cost, since if you use your removal now, you then won't have it later on. That's why knowing is half the battle. You need to know what the biggest threat is so you can remove that specifically. Sometimes that can be very obvious. If they're playing a Turgid deck, you know that Turgid is going to come down and try and steal your stuff, so you should be ready for it. But there are so many additional factors to threat assessment. One important factor to think about is your opponent's clock, which means how many turns until they take you out of the game. If they have a 1-1, you got plenty of time. If they have a 5-5, you have less, and if they have a 10-10, that clock is pretty fast. This might seem obvious, right? A bigger creature is more threatening, but this is only the base level of threat assessment. And oftentimes in Commander, it's not correct to just think about stats. For one, even if your opponent has a 100-100 with double strike and trample, it's not actually a threat to you in Commander until you are attacked by that player. Remember, you have two other opponents who could be attacked. If I look you in the eyes and tell you my infinitely large creature is attacking a different player, then the threat level to you is very low. Commander has this additional politics aspect that can turn even the scariest creatures into non-threats if you just think or know your opponent is going to attack you last. And in Commander, you can make deals. Telling an opponent that you're going to shoot their commander if it attacks you can oftentimes reduce the threat to nothing and have them attack someone else. Quick aside, don't actually play Shoot the Sheriff, the card sucks. I've seen it pop up a few times in EDH patron games, and every time it has not hit the thing the player wanted. But bluffing removal is an important skill in threat assessment for Commander players, because it's a way to shift the level of threat of a card without actually spending removal. But let's say the creatures are going to attack you. Alright, pop quiz. Which of these two creatures is a bigger threat? Ragavan or Fusion Elemental? If I have an empty board and one piece of spot removal, what should I hit? The answer is often Ragavan. If my board is empty, I would rather get hit by a Fusion Elemental, because the card advantage and ramp from Ragavan can often turn that threat into many more threats. Now, of course, this is life total dependent. If I'm at 3 life remaining, then I should probably hit the Fusion Elemental so I don't get taken out of the game. But I just wanted to highlight that stats are not everything, especially in Commander. When you have a really high life total, you can often take a little bit more chip damage. Yet players tend to heavily overweight stats when assessing threats. But in reality, the most dangerous thing is card draw. Simply put, card draw allows your opponents to get more threats, and then they'll have more threats than you have removal. In most games of Magic, you will lose if your opponent had more threats than you had answers. And it's very difficult to have more removal in your deck than your opponent would have threats. Triply so in Commander because you have 3 opponents. There is something to be said about repeatable removal and control decks, but I said a lot of that in this video here. I'll put a card if you want to check it out. But assuming you're not in a controlled deck and you just have a regular suite of spot removal and board wipes, how do we actually utilize these even though our opponents will have more threats than we'll have removal? And the answer is knowing when to ignore a threat. This can happen in many different ways. If life totals get low, then you can ignore threats by just being aggressive. Again, looking at that clock. If I have a 2-turn clock with a flyer, and they have a 3-turn clock with a big creature, their threat isn't the big creature. It would be a flying blocker. Now, low life totals aren't super common in EDH, but you can often find yourself in a situation where you have something to blank a threat, to just repeatedly block it, like a fog bank blocking some creature, or a pillar fort effect deterring attacks. These types of effects are great ways to turn a threat into a ignorable threat, or at least ignorable until your opponent can't attack you. Similar to ignoring threats, you also need to save your removal. I commonly see players look around at the table and say, hey, are there any artifacts in play? Because they drew that artifact removal and they really want to cast it. But please be conservative with your removal as well. You don't need to cast every piece that you draw immediately. A lot of this video so far has been me talking about card advantage and creatures on board, but there's another threat I want to talk about. Pop quiz. What is the worst thing your opponent could do on their turn? The answer is win the game. And if they're winning on their turn, a lot of times in Commander, this might be done with a combo. Threat assessment for combos is probably one of the most common weak points any casual EDH player might have. It's a popular misconception that combos magically appear in your opponent's hand and they're unavoidable. But this is far from true. I think that a lot of casual EDH players can learn from 1v1 Magic about how to deal with combos. In most 1v1 formats, if you play against a combo deck, generally their board is weaker and you just attack them and either you aggro them out before they get the combo online, or you don't spend removal on anything because there's nothing to spend it on until they play their combo piece. But in Commander, with 3 opponents, a lot of players will avoid making enemies, avoid attacking players. Oh, they don't have anything in play, so I'm just not going to swing at them. But if that player is casting cantrips, card draw, tutors, yeah, they might not have anything on board, but they're building a doomsday engine in their hand, and you do need to be concerned about that. Predicting what your opponent is going to do is a very important part of threat assessment, and I think not enough players will consider that. EDH players will tend to overweight damage and stats over a potential invisible threat. So to beat a combo deck, it's the same as it is in a 1v1 format. You aggro them out before they get the combo online. The only difference is in EDH, you might have to tell the other 2 players, hey, so-and-so just cast a tutor and a card draw spell. They're probably going to go for a combo. We should attack them. Or at the very least, hold up removal for the combo. I've said this in other videos, but you should not feel bad for attacking a player who is sacrificing power on board in favor of digging for a combo. It's just correct threat assessment and the right thing you should do. I also want to extend this to turbo ramp decks. If your opponent has no creatures on board but they ramped to 12 lands, there's still a threat and you should 100% attack them. So that's threat assessment. Think about your opponent's clock, focus on card advantage, focus on invisible threats and what your opponent might do, and begin threat assessment as soon as you have any information. Don't attack a player at random. You can look and see whose deck might be scariest in the late game, or who might utilize their life total more than someone else, and use that information to accurately threat assess and attack. I think if you follow these core principles, your threat assessment will improve significantly. Hopefully you found some of these helpful. Oh, one more pop quiz. How can you support this channel? The answer is by liking, subscribing, or checking out the Patreon. I got lots of perks, including being in the credits like my tier 3 patrons here.